Before we continue, let me ask you a simple question, too simple to be comfortable. If everything you love, everything you've built, everything that seems solid today is going to change, why do you still live as if it were eternal? Perhaps this question passed through your mind too quickly. Perhaps you felt a slight unease and tried to move on. That's exactly where the conflict begins that almost no one truly wants to face. There's a quiet moment, usually at night or in the empty spaces of the day, when something inside you senses a disconnect. You make plans as if you were in control. You cling to people, ideas, versions of yourself, as if you could freeze time. You accumulate achievements, memories, titles, old pains, carefully constructed identities. And yet, there's this strange feeling that something is slipping away, like sand slowly passing through your fingers, even when you try to close your hand tightly. Buddhism calls this anicca, impermanence, not as an abstract, distant, or religious idea, but as a psychological and practical fact of human experience. Everything changes. Everything transforms. Nothing remains the same for long. And yet the mind insists on acting as if it could fix what is, by nature, transient. It is at this point that silent suffering is born, the kind that makes no noise, but weighs heavily. Pay close attention. People don't just suffer because they lose something. They suffer because they believe, even without realizing it, that something should have remained. They suffer because they build their identity on things that have no roots: a job, a relationship, a good phase, an image of success, a personal narrative. When this changes, and it always does, the mind enters into conflict. Resistance arises. Anxiety arises. The fear of losing what deep down was never permanent arises. Perhaps you've felt this before. One day everything seemed to make sense, and the next, it didn't. People changed. You changed. Circumstances dissolved, and yet something inside you continued trying to carry the past, as if it were possible to live today with the weight of yesterday without paying an internal price. The problem isn't remembering. The problem is clinging. It's not feeling. It's identifying completely with what's gone. Buddhist philosophy doesn't point to this as a moral error, but as a conditioning of the mind. The mind seeks security, it seeks stability, it seeks continuity, but life offers no fixed guarantees. And when we try to transform the transient into something definitive, we create a constant, almost invisible tension that steals presence, clarity, and lightness. That's why, even in seemingly good moments, there's an underlying unease, like a low noise that never completely silences. Perhaps now you are beginning to perceive the contrast. While life moves forward, the mind tries to hold on. While everything flows, something within us wants to freeze. And this silent attempt at control disguises itself as planning, ambition, emotional attachment, fear of letting go. The aesthetics of life change, but the mind insists on repeating the same internal gestures as if it hadn't yet learned the art of walking lightly. Notice how this perception creates a pause, a brief mental silence, not to respond quickly, nor to find immediate solutions, but to observe. Because before knowing what is worth carrying, there is something even more important: realizing how much you are already carrying unnecessarily. And it is precisely this invisible weight, almost never questioned, that begins to reveal itself when you confront impermanence head-on, not as a theory, but as a living experience that continues to unfold within you as we move on to the next layer of this reflection. And perhaps, as you listen to this, something is already stirring within you, not as a clear answer, but as a subtle, almost elegant discomfort that points to the need for change. Because perceiving impermanence is not the end of anything, it's the beginning of a different stance towards life. A more conscious, more psychological, more practical stance. Less reactive, less burdensome. And this doesn't happen automatically. The mind doesn't change on its own just because it understood a beautiful idea. Every real change begins with a simple, almost symbolic gesture, acknowledging to yourself that something needs to be different. Not tomorrow. Not when everything is resolved, but now, at this precise point in your attention. When you name the intention, something reorganizes itself internally. That's why I want to invite you to do something small, but powerful. If this reflection touched you on any level, write a single word in the comments. Change. Not for me, for you. As a silent commitment that you no longer want to live on autopilot, carrying burdens that no longer make sense. This gesture matters more than it seems. It transforms the passive spectator into someone present, someone who consciously chooses to participate in their own process. And if you feel that this type of content, psychological, philosophical, poetic, and to the point, makes sense for the moment you are living, leave a like. Not as empty support, but as an internal sign of alignment. When you like something, you say to yourself, "This is relevant to me now." And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, consider doing so as part of your decision to move forward with more clarity. The goal here isn't to offer quick answers or ready-made formulas, but to create spaces for pause, mental aesthetics, and practical awareness. Videos for those who feel too much, think too much, and are beginning to realize that perhaps the problem was never a lack of effort, but an excess of attachment. In the next few minutes, we're going to take a deeper look at what you've been carrying without realizing it. Not visible things, but internal structures, expectations, old stories, identities that no longer serve you. Because before choosing what's worth carrying forward, you need to recognize the invisible weight that's draining your energy right now. And that requires presence. It requires honesty. It requires silence. It's precisely at this point that the reflection begins to become deeper and more transformative. And it is precisely here that the conversation begins to get more intimate, more psychological, more honest. Because when we talk about weight, almost everyone imagines something big, dramatic, obvious. But what is most tiring is not what screams. It's what remains silent within the mind. The invisible weight doesn't appear on the body immediately, doesn't attract the attention of others, doesn't generate external comments. It settles in slowly, like a constant noise that you learn to ignore, until you realize you're already exhausted without knowing exactly why. Much of this weight comes from old resentments, situations that have already passed, people who have already gone their separate ways, words that were not said or that were said too often. The mind stores these scenes as if they were still current, as if revisiting the past could change something. Psychologically, this creates an internal repetition. You relive old emotions with a body that is no longer in that time. The result is continuous wear and tear, a subtle tension that consumes emotional energy in the present. Another silent burden is unmet expectations. What you imagined it would be, what should have happened, what made sense in your head. The mind constructs very convincing narratives about how life should unfold. When reality follows a different rhythm, frustration arises, and instead of adjusting consciousness to what is, many people try to adjust reality to what they imagined. This misalignment generates anxiety, a feeling of being behind, constant comparison, and a restlessness that is never fully resolved. There's also the weight of past versions of yourself, who you needed to be to please others, who you believed you should become to be accepted. Identities created at different stages of life, with different pains, that continue to be carried even when they no longer make sense. Psychologically, this creates rigidity. Philosophically, it prevents flow. Aesthetically, it makes life heavy, repetitive, without freshness. You continue to react with old tools to new situations. And perhaps one of the deepest burdens is the fear of losing what, deep down, is already changing. Relationships that are no longer the same, phases that are ending, sensations that will never return. The mind perceives the change, but refuses to accept it. Then attachment arises, which in Buddhism is called upadana. It's not just liking or valuing something, it's holding on internally, even when it has already begun to dissolve. It's emotionally insisting where life is already demanding movement. The central point, and this is essential to understand, is that suffering doesn't stem from loss itself. Everything is lost at some level. Suffering arises from clinging to what cannot remain. When you try to hold on to what is impermanent, you create internal conflict. When you accept change consciously, you create space. It's not indifference. It's clarity. It's not coldness. It's emotional maturity. Buddhism doesn't teach not to feel, but not to become imprisoned by what you feel. Notice how this invisible weight manifests itself in everyday life, in the difficulty of relaxing, in the mind that never slows down, in the feeling that something is always missing, even when everything seems to be fine. This is not bad luck, nor weakness. It is the psychological effect of accumulation. You carry stories that have already ended, expectations that no longer exist, fears based on scenarios that may never happen. And all of this occupies internal space, preventing presence, lightness, and mindfulness. Perhaps now you are beginning to recognize yourself in parts of this process. Perhaps some phrases have resonated more deeply than others, and that's important. Because awareness begins precisely there, in recognition. Before letting go, you need to see. Before changing, you need to admit. Before walking lightly, you need to perceive the weight. Therefore, I want to ask you a simple but extremely revealing question, and it's worth letting it echo within you for a few seconds. What are you still carrying that has already served its purpose? Don't answer quickly. Don't try to be too rational. Just observe what arises. A person, an idea, guilt, fear, an old version of who you were? This question doesn't demand immediate action, but it opens a space of awareness that changes everything. And it is precisely this space that we will explore more deeply in the next part, when we begin to look at what Buddhism teaches to let go of, not as loss, but as liberation. Before we continue, if anything here resonated with you, please leave a comment. Write a word or short phrase that represents how you feel right now. It could be, I'm carrying too much, time to let go, I want lightness, or simply, change. This simple gesture internally reinforces the process that has already begun. If this content is helping you look inward with more awareness, please like it. This helps the channel and signals to yourself that this path matters. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so now to continue this journey of psychological reflection, practical and conscious, step by step, without rushing, but with depth. And when you begin to perceive this invisible weight, something curious happens. The mind immediately wants to solve, organize, control. It tries to transform consciousness into just another task. This is where Buddhism makes a silent, almost counterintuitive turn. It asks not only what you are carrying, but what you have learned to carry without ever questioning. Because there are burdens that don't seem like weight, they seem like identity, they seem like protection, they seem like maturity, but they are profoundly tiring illusions. One of these burdens is the need for control. Not obvious, authoritarian control, but subtle, everyday psychological control. The constant attempt to predict outcomes, avoid frustrations, ensure that nothing deviates from the internal script that the mind has created. You call this responsibility, planning, caution. But inside, it's fear, disguised as logic. Buddhism observes this clearly. The more you try to control life, the more tense you become in the face of impermanence. Because to control is, at its core, to deny that things change without asking permission. This need for control creates constant internal vigilance. You don't fully relax. You're always anticipating, adjusting, mentally correcting what hasn't even happened yet. Psychologically, this generates anxiety. Philosophically, it generates resistance. Aesthetically, it robs the experience of its lightness. The mind becomes rigid while life continues to flow. And this disconnect exacts a silent price, emotional exhaustion. Another illusory burden is rigid identity, that phrase that seems harmless but imprisons, I am like this. When you believe too much in this idea, you transform a phase into a sentence, a trait into a prison, a defense into a personality. Buddhism doesn't deny individuality, but it points to something essential. Everything that can be observed in you is not you. Thoughts change, emotions pass, behaviors adapt. When you cling to a fixed identity, you begin to defend old versions of yourself even when they no longer serve you. This rigid identity creates deep internal conflicts. You feel the urge to change, but you feel like you're betraying who you've always been. You want to let go of certain patterns, but you fear losing recognition, coherence, and psychological grounding. So you continue carrying emotional habits that no longer make sense, just to maintain a stable internal image. Attachment to identity is one of the most difficult to perceive because it is confused with security. But in practice, it limits growth and blocks presence. The third illusory burden is the idea that happiness is something fixed, a permanent state that once achieved should remain intact. The mind projects this state into the future, onto external conditions, onto specific achievements. When that happens, I'll be fine. The problem is that when the moment arrives, it passes. And when it passes, frustration arises, not because happiness has ended, but because the expectation was unrealistic. Buddhism observes that happiness, like everything else, is impermanent. It comes and goes, and trying to fix it generates suffering. Here's a central point that completely changes the way of living. Buddhism does not teach to reject life, pleasure, experiences, or attachments. It teaches not to cling to them. There is a profound difference between living fully and holding on tightly, between appreciating and clinging, between feeling and identifying completely with what is fleeting. When you cling, you suffer when things change. When you appreciate, you are grateful while you exist. Nothing needs to be held tightly to be lived deeply. This phrase is not just poetic, it's profoundly practical. When you let go of the need for control, you begin to trust the flow more. When you release a rigid identity, you open space for more authentic versions of yourself to emerge. When you let go of the idea of fixed happiness, you begin to recognize small moments of presence that were previously ignored. The internal act of letting go doesn't impoverish life, it makes it more real. Imagine hands slowly opening. They don't throw away, they don't reject, they don't push. They simply let go of what no longer needs to be held. This image is central to Buddhist practice and the psychology of consciousness. Letting go is not losing, it is releasing psychic energy. It is ceasing to spend attention on what no longer responds. It is allowing the mind to rest from the constant need to defend, maintain, justify. Perhaps you realize now that many of your tensions don't stem from real problems, but from illusory burdens you've accepted as normal. Excessive control, a fixed identity, the search for permanent emotional stability. None of this is required by life. They are strategies of the mind to cope with the fear of change. And when these strategies begin to be seen clearly, something softens inside. It's not euphoria, it's space. This inner space is fundamental for the next step in reflection, because while Buddhism teaches what not to carry, it delicately points to what is truly worth carrying forward. But before we move on, it's worth marking this moment of awareness. If something here touched you, leave a sign of that in the comments. It can be a simple phrase like, letting go of control, I'm not fixed, less attachment, or more lightness. This helps to anchor the intention. If this content is helping you look at life in a more conscious, psychological, and practical way, please like it. This supports the channel and internally reinforces this path. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider doing so now to continue this philosophical, poetic, and minimalist journey, where each part connects to the next, deepening precisely this space that is beginning to open up within you. When you begin to let go of what you no longer need to carry, a silent, almost inevitable question naturally arises. If so much weighs you down, then what is truly worth carrying forward? This question doesn't ask for quick answers or beautiful concepts. It asks for experience, because when the excess begins to fall away, something essential remains. Not as an object, not as an identity, not as an achievement, but as an inner quality. Buddhism points precisely to this. There are things that don't weigh you down, don't age, and aren't lost with time, because they don't depend on the external world to exist. The first of these is presence. Presence not as a technique, but as a conscious psychological state of being here. Being fully present in what is happening now, without dragging along the past, and without anticipating the future. Presence doesn't weigh you down, because it doesn't require effort to maintain. It simply happens when the mind stops resisting. Unlike possessions, personal narratives, or expectations, presence doesn't need to be defended. It renews itself every instant. Even when everything changes outside, the capacity to be attentive remains available. When you are present, life becomes simpler and more vibrant at the same time. The senses become clearer, emotions flow more freely, and thoughts lose their rigidity. Psychologically, this reduces internal conflict. Philosophically, it aligns you with impermanence. Aesthetically, it restores beauty to the ordinary moment. Presence doesn't age because it doesn't belong to time. It happens in the now, always new. The second thing that is truly worth carrying is awareness. Awareness is that which observes, that which perceives thoughts, emotions, impulses, and internal narratives without becoming completely confused by them. In Buddhism, this point is central. You are not what passes through your mind. You are the space that perceives movement. When this awareness strengthens, suffering diminishes because you stop automatically identifying with every internal fluctuation. A conscience doesn't weigh you down because it doesn't accumulate. It doesn't hold grudges, doesn't construct rigid narratives, doesn't cling to results. It simply sees, and seeing clearly is, in itself, a liberating act. Even when difficult emotions arise, conscience allows you to navigate them without sinking into them. This creates inner stability without rigidity, firmness without excessive control. It's a silent foundation that doesn't depend on favorable circumstances. The third thing worth carrying is compassion. And here it's important to understand compassion not as weakness, but as profound emotional intelligence. Compassion is the ability to recognize pain in yourself and in others without hardening, without denying it, without running away. When you carry compassion, you stop fighting against your own imperfection and the imperfection of others. This drastically reduces the emotional weight of relationships, expectations, and frustrations. Compassion doesn't age because it's not tied to social roles or life stages. It deepens with experience. The more you see impermanence, the more you understand human suffering. And the more you understand, the less you need to judge. Psychologically, this generates relief. Philosophically, this generates practical wisdom. Compassion doesn't create suffering when it changes, because it doesn't demand that anything be different from what it is in order to exist. The fourth essential thing is inner clarity. Clarity isn't about having all the answers, but about knowing what truly matters in each moment, knowing when to move forward and when to let go, when to speak and when to be silent, when to insist and when to accept. Inner clarity is born from the union of presence and awareness. It doesn't depend on external certainties, but on internal alignment. And the more you release illusory burdens, the more accessible this clarity becomes. Clarity doesn't weigh you down because it eliminates excess. It cuts through mental noise. It dissolves unnecessary confusion. It simplifies choices. While a confused mind gets lost in 1,000 possibilities, a clear mind recognizes what is essential. This doesn't mean an absence of challenges, but an absence of unnecessary internal conflict. Even amidst change, clarity offers direction without rigidity, movement without anxiety. This is why Buddhism points to a radical inversion of values. The wise person doesn't carry things. They carry awareness. They are not defined by what they possess, nor by what they have lost, nor by what they hope to achieve. They walk lightly because they have learned to invest in what cannot be taken away. Presence, awareness, compassion, and inner clarity do not depend on time, people, or circumstances. They do not need to be defended. They are simply cultivated. Imagine a person sitting in silence, enveloped in soft light. Nothing spectacular happens. Nothing needs to happen. Yet, there is depth, stability, and peace. This image perfectly represents what is worth carrying. It's not escaping the world, but intimacy with it. It's not rejecting life, but coexisting without excessive attachment. When you begin to live from these inner qualities, something changes almost imperceptibly. Life remains impermanent, but ceases to be threatening. Perhaps as you listen to this, you'll realize that the search was never for more things, more control, or more guarantees. Perhaps it was always for that inner state of conscious lightness, and this recognition doesn't close anything off. It opens up space, because from here, an even deeper question arises, one that no longer speaks of letting go or carrying, but of how to walk through life knowing that everything passes, without fear, without rigidity, and without losing oneself. Before we move on to this next reflection, it's worth anchoring what has emerged so far. If any of these ideas resonated with you, please leave a comment. It can be something simple like, more presence, I choose awareness, I want clarity, or walking lightly. This gesture helps transform reflection into living intention. If this content is bringing you peace, direction, and practical awareness, please like it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing now to continue this psychological, philosophical, and conscious journey, step by step, at this very pace of silence, depth, and truth. And it is here that everything begins to reorganize itself from within, not as a conclusion, but as a silent invitation that continues to echo as life goes on. Because when you truly understand, not just with your mind, but with experience, that everything passes, something changes in the way you walk. The world doesn't change. The weight with which you traverse the world changes. Impermanence ceases to be a threat and becomes an ally. What once generated fear begins to generate freedom. Perhaps, for a long time, you've lived trying too hard to protect certain things, relationships, images, versions of yourself, inner certainties, as if losing any of them would mean losing yourself. But when you observe more consciously, you realize that the question was never, "What will I lose?" That question stems from attachment, the need for control, the fear of change. The real question, the mature question, is another. What are you willing to let go of in order to live with more presence, more clarity, and less burden? Traveling lightly through life doesn't mean living without connections, without care, or without depth. It means living without excessive attachment to what cannot stay. It means understanding that everything that arrives also goes, and that this doesn't diminish the value of the experience. On the contrary, it makes each moment more alive. Psychologically, this reduces anxiety. Philosophically, it aligns you with reality. Aesthetically, it restores simplicity to daily life. Life ceases to be a constant struggle against time and becomes a flow that you learn to follow. Notice how fear diminishes when you stop demanding permanence from things. Fear arises from trying to fix what is fluid. When you accept that nothing is definitive, the mind relaxes. Not because everything is resolved, but because you stop demanding impossible guarantees. Walking without fear is not walking without challenges. It's walking without unnecessary internal resistance. It's going through changes without breaking inside with each transition. When you learn to let go, something curious happens. Space opens up. Mental space, emotional space, space to breathe better, feel better, perceive better. This space isn't empty, it's fertile. It's where presence deepens, where consciousness stabilizes, where compassion finds its place. And the more inner space there is, the less life needs to be controlled to make sense. You begin to trust the process more, and rigid certainties less. Traveling light also means letting go of old guilts as if they were still necessary. It means ceasing to hold on to pains that have already served their teaching purpose. It means stopping repeating internal narratives that no longer represent who you are becoming. None of this needs to be forcibly removed. Letting go is not a violent act. It's a gradual, conscious, almost gentle gesture towards yourself. It's realizing that holding on hurts more than allowing something to go. Perhaps now you can feel this more clearly, not as a distant idea, but as a practical invitation. The invitation to choose every day not to carry more than necessary, not to react automatically, not to define yourself by everything that passes through your mind. Impermanence, when embraced, does not create emptiness. It creates emotional maturity. You begin to live with less fear of the end because you learn to live the journey better. When you understand that nothing is permanent, you learn to walk without fear. This phrase doesn't point to the future, it points to the present. to how you deal with what is happening at this very moment, to how you react to changes, to losses, to inevitable transformations. Walking without fear is not a lack of sensitivity. It is sufficient presence to cross without clinging. And before we move on, I want to invite you to pause for a few seconds and honestly feel what arises within you right now. Don't answer with your head. Feel it in your body, in your chest, in the silence between your thoughts. What do you feel you can let go of today? It can be small, it can be big, it can be an expectation, a hurt, an old version of yourself, a recurring fear. You don't need to explain. Just acknowledge it. If it makes sense, leave it in the comments as a conscious gesture. A single word is enough. It could be let go, lightness, or presence. If you want to go a little further, write something like, "I'm ready to walk lighter," or "I don't need to carry everything." These small gestures help transform reflection into living intention and strengthen the inner commitment to change. If this video is helping you look at life with more awareness, psychological depth, and practical clarity, please give it a like. This supports the channel and signals that this type of content matters to you. And if you haven't subscribed yet, consider subscribing now to continue this journey of philosophical, poetic, and conscious reflection, where each part connects.